Thanks for watching. I'm here with Joshua Miller. Joshua Miller is a cartoonist from the Buffalo, New York area. Joshua is the creator of Fymbulwynter, which is now in its third issue. He also has a Kickstarter for Fymbulwynter. It's a self-published book. It's really great. I've enjoyed it. And so I just thought it'd be fun to have Josh here. We could talk about his book, the Kickstarter, and anything else that pops up in our mind. So Joshua, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's cool. It's cool to be here. We talked a little bit online about it when you first got my book, so it's cool. Yeah.
All right. So actually, so just I'm not gonna spoil the book, but just so people know, Fimbulwinter is a story that's based on an event that's in the Norse mythology, part or post Ragnarok. So I just wanted to know generally, like, how you came up with the idea to do this piece, because usually in comics that I've read, it's always like there's Ragnarok and that's it, and everything just like it's like an iron curtain, everything stops. Even Jack Kirby, when did the New Gods, was like there was it's post Ragnarok, so there's new gods, but it's this is more like a battle and there's still like ongoing stuff that's not resolved.
Yeah. When I okay, so the whole idea started when I read Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. It was just
Oh,
Neil Gaiman telling the stories that he had already read and grew up with as a child, but telling them through kind of his lens. And it was very specifically the chapter on Fenrir. I had already been out of school, and I was just kind of looking for something to do because I knew the whole reason I went to college is because I cared so much about drawing. I cared so much about comics, but I needed refinement and I needed a reason to keep drawing because I didn't trust myself to draw or know what to do after school if I just went for it. So school's done. I need to get a get going. I need to get some sort of idea artistically to
okay.
try to build up my portfolio, try to build up just maybe a fan base, just keep myself going. So I was actively trying to think of comic ideas, trying to think of like a web comic, just trying to think of stuff to draw. And I thought of one series that I cast aside after like 6 pages, even though I still like the idea. But then I read that book, and the Fenrir chapter really spoke to me because it was just I love dogs, and he was just a good boy, and he really got done dirty. So and it really stuck with me, and it just bothered me. And in the original Ragnarok, Fenrir uh, eats Odin, and then his mouth gets snapped open after years of imprisonment in a cave, and I'm just like, that's not right. So I started thinking about like what would happen if he was okay? What happened if he lived? And when I started expanding on that in the story, it really showed that all of this stuff in Norse mythology is really the preamble to what I would consider his real story. It's like somebody once said that's kind of like fan fiction of mythology. Uh, but basically, it was just taking Fenrir and trying to figure out what he would be doing after his destiny had been fulfilled, except it hadn't been fulfilled because he wasn't dead. Um, it probably also came about because of like my love of Hellboy. I
Hmm.
I read Hellboy. Uh, it wasn't my first comic. It was really one of the first comics that like meant a lot to me. Um, and just the whole him battling against this fate that had been laid out before him and that he had choice. Um, I don't know. It spoke to me. It's because I'm very stubborn myself. So people telling me what to do can sometimes make me frustrated, and it kind of is the same thing for Fenrir. Like no, I don't want to do that. Why would I want to do that? Uh, uh, so it was very much me just kind of laying out the foundation, saying, okay, what if he didn't die in Ragnarok, and then me trying to figure out like what would happen next. And that was it was just kind of like plucking out of the ether certain characters that I knew still lived, still mattered according to mythology, like Magni and Modi and Valley were
Hmm.
all these gods that either weren't like mentioned in the end, or uh, at least weren't dead at the end of Ragnarok.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
Go
and
ahead.
trying to figure out what they would want to do. So it was just kind of connecting the dots and just like rolling a ball down a hill, trying to figure out what where I thought it would go.
Yeah, I thought I like it. I like it a lot from that perspective because I mentioned earlier that you taking a lot of the see my experience was reading Norse mythology and comics. I mean, I've read Norse mythology when I was a kid. I love mythology, but it's either Jack Kirby's Thor or Pete Craig Russell's like The Ring of the Nibelung, that beautiful, dreamy kind of work, or everybody's like hyper realized. And then I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, this is different. This doesn't follow the tropes. Like there's certain tropes that you think, like I had mentioned, we talked earlier, it reminded me of Disney's Frozen, where you had this storyline, but then just when you were going to get to a trope, they kind of flipped the trope upside down, and you're like, oh, we're not going to do that. But that's what you do in every Disney film. So to me, it was like, oh, we're not going to do this, or oh, I didn't see that coming, and I enjoy that because it's not a formula thing. And one thing personally that I like in a comic nowadays is when I don't know how it's going to end. I have no idea how this book is going to end, and so that's part of it with this that I enjoy. It's like, oh, we're doing something really different here, and I don't know how this thing is going to shake out. So I congratulate you on that because you know you're just doing something different with it, which I personally liked, and that treatment. Um, One thing I also liked is that the way you draw the characters, because again, my background is Jack Kirby, where everybody looks like they've been, shooting steroids and working in the gym,
Pretty
or like
jacked.
or Jack, just super Jack. Everybody's Jack, and excuse me, and or like P. Craig Russell again, where it's that beautiful, everybody's slim, it's and everybody looks, it's almost sensuous kind of drawing. And here they look like normal warriors. They're not beautiful. They're not dressed out in all these fancy robes with the polka dots and all that thing, and all that thing like Thor used to have. They look like people that are part of a Celtic type of clan that are out, you know, pillaging or avenging or whatever. So I was just kind of curious of like where you was it like just I want to stick it to the traditional or how you it's kind of an idea. I just want to know like how you came up with that because I like that too.
I don't know. That one I don't fully know because when I first started it, I'm like, okay, I was really worried about like the idea of accuracy. So it was very much like looking at all of these pieces, and then you find out stuff when you look on like Google Images and you look up books and stuff that it's like, they're like, yeah, you think of Viking helmets, you think of horns, and that
Mm,
isn't real. And then you look at all these outfits, and they're just basically like a nice big shirt with like a belt cinching it and like kind of
right,
a low neckline because they didn't have zippers.
right.
Um, but it was kind of just innate. I just wanted them to look cool, and it's probably because I read so much manga growing up, and the rule of cool always mattered to me. So there was some sort of like trying to figure out what seemed close enough to real while also feeling kind of cool. Also didn't feel like intimidating to draw, um, because like with Magni and Modi, I feel like they're very like basic. They're a tunic, they got pants, they got boots, and they got like a furry a coat with some like nice buttons, big metal buttons. Because I just wanted them to look like warriors. It looked like plain old Vikings, at least according to like what we think, where it's just like furry shirt, big jacket. Um, but then when it comes to helmets, I don't care. I just want something fun. Um, but with Valley, there's something about utility. So I designed some sort of outfit where it's like big old what's the word? overalls that I wanted to kind of look like a blacksmith overall, like leathers. I will say that the latest character I designed in the fourth chapter, I don't know what I'm doing there. Obviously, I'm just kind of trusting myself because he's just kind of where I've a spoiler. It's not a spoiler. But Loki's going to show up in this next chapter because it's the way past. And I was trying to figure out a design for him that was just the problem was I grew up on Marvel Comics. I didn't read much Thor, but with just the widespread Thor movies, with the comics, everyone has like an idea of what Loki is, and it's kind of my feeling of like, but my Loki isn't that Loki. How am I going to design a character that is so well represented, that is so like in the public consciousness? So I was just trying to figure out some sort of look for him that I thought matched his aesthetic while also didn't steal from anything. So it's very much like he's kind of this like rock star, tight leather pants, a lot of belts, long hair, anything like wolf like. It's very much I guess what it comes down to is I try not to worry too much about the details, too much about factual accuracy. Because that's just not the kind of that's not the story I'm telling. It's mythology. It's
Right.
supposed to be ideas. There's a boat made out of fingernails. There's a belt. I mean, not a belt, a boot made out of the scraps of leather that blacksmiths don't use. It felt very much like a. I just have to trust like an innate sense of style, and try to figure out something that looked right for the characters. It really just comes down to I like feeling this innate sense of like, yep, that's how it's supposed to look.
Yeah, because they do actually look, it like makes sense when you see them dressed like, yeah, they would wear this or something like this. It seems, I mean, whether or not it's historically accurate, but it makes sense. Like you're talking about
Yeah,
a big furry shirt with a tunic. So it's not flopping around because, you're not going to be wearing, you know, armor or any of these fancy gold things that look great when Jack Kirby's drawing them, but, don't really work in real life.
it was very much the idea of like I couldn't help but think about just the Jack Kirby like sci-fi Norse, where it's just big armor, big fun
Mhm.
hats, um, and it was just trying to decide if that felt right or not. And it being post-apocalyptic in a sense, it kind of made it feel like everything should be much more utility.
Right. And kind of deconstructed because
Yeah.
like you've had an apocalypse. Yeah. You mentioned being in school. So is your degree and was your and I'm sorry I couldn't find this online, but is your degree in art or commercial drawing?
I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in illustration specifically.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it was mainly for like I guess it would be mainly for kids books. That's kind of it's not like what I had oriented in my mind. I've always been pretty comic centered, but it was very much that's kind of what they were teaching in the school. That's the closest thing I ever really found for the right term for what I wanted to do because when I don't know, when I was growing up, I heard the term illustration and it was very much just like telling a story through pictures. And I
Hmm.
was like, well, what else is a comic book? It's just you do it a lot more because of each panel.
Right.
And because
Okay.
I've always loved movies, it's very much I love storytelling and narratives. So it's very much just being interested in movies and comic books, video games, anything with a picture and with story combining.
What kind of movies? Or is there a
Uh,
genre or just directors or just in general anything?
I'm a monster. I devour them all. I am insatiable. I have a letterbox where I rate them all, even though I don't even feel fully believe in rating artistic stuff. Like this whole last year, I've really fallen in love with Cronenberg. Um, I don't know why. He's just a weird body horror pervert, but but it just like really speaks to me. But
Yeah.
I'm a I'm a freak in the way that I love just watching anything and everything. Like the other day, I watched what was it? An Austrian film by Haneke called Funny Games, and then to follow that up, I watched Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, a feel good romp. Um, Funny Games is not a feel good romp.
No.
It's a lie.
Yeah, but I think and this is something that I've said before, and just my opinion, is that I
Mhm.
think all art informs all other art. I
Oh,
think a lot
for
of
sure.
people that do comics just have read a lot of comics, but they haven't watched a lot of film, and you can learn a lot, or watched a lot of really good TV, or picked up lessons. Or sometimes you can learn things from music, even from the musicians themselves, like how they approach things, because all that is at the at its core is all creative. So I think watching films and watching TV is really you can learn a lot, especially about storytelling, about lighting. I've seen, I used to do a lot of photography. My wife and I had a photography side hustle. We stopped it because the kids were getting older and we figured, you know what, let's just spend time with the kids. But I learned a lot, and I was always like looking at images, and sometimes I'd see movies and I'd say, and I stop it, like watching TV. It's like, you see how he's framing that? You see where his head is? That's like perfect, you know? But I would think, but I've always had an image in my head when I like have gone on shoots subsequent to that, or now I just take pictures for friends of mine, but I treat it like a shoot. So it's like, you know, you learn a lot from these things. Even like TV, you learn a lot from like good quality TV. So that's cool that you're doing that, and you can pick up a lot of ideas.
Yeah, I swear that um, I all of what I do is kind of instinctual, and I feel like it's probably because I've consumed so much media because that it just I don't know at what point in my life, but it felt very important to me, and it still does. But the act of storytelling feels like a very important thing about human culture slash just life in general. Um, and there's something about us just making up stories, this like pure act of creation that I love and that I really care about. And it's like something that can stay on uh, uh, through time, depending on how good it is. So from a very young age, I just loved anything and everything involving storytelling. It was very much like my mom instilled like loving movies in me. I think when I was young, I got into comics because like my parents were divorced and I just kind of wanted to know more like about them in some way, like what they cared about, what they liked. And at some point I just really like got in my head that what people enjoyed really told me a lot about them. And like my mom talked about reading comics when she was a kid, so she was reading X-Men and my dad was reading like Usagi Yojimbo.
Mm,
Oh, Usagi Yojimbo, whatever.
okay.
Uh, um, so it was very much those two comics became some of my favorite comics because it made me feel a little closer to them, but also just kind of gave me that like feeling of like knowing these are important to people that are important to me and like what this says about them, how this affects them. It's kind of like how I don't mean to be judgy, but when I walk into a friend's house, I can't help but want to look at their DVDs because there's something about like what you like that matters to me.
Well, no, I think you can learn a lot from what people have on their bookshelf or in their
Yeah.
DVD collection. There's a lot of I think there's a lot you can learn, because sometimes you'll come in and you'll be like, they have this? Like I wouldn't expect them to have that. That you know, that book or that DVD or sometimes. So I think there is a connection, I think, if between what people like as media, books, movies, and like what goes on in their head or how they see things. I mean, you know, you're not yeah, and I don't think you're being judgy. I think
Yeah, I it's like I
well, some people would
sometimes at
consider
certain
it.
movies I'm like, "Oh," but other movies I'm like, "Oh, that's just interesting. It tells me something more about them."
Well, yeah, but I mean, you know, like if you know, it's hey man, everybody likes what they like, but I agree with you, because like there's certain things that I do like, and I wish I had a bigger DVD collection. But sometimes there'll be movies like artsy films. Like in the 80s, I used to watch a lot of European, lot of foreign artsy films.
Mhm.
So people will mention like, oh yeah, I saw that in 80 something in the theaters. And like, you saw that? Like The Unbearable Lightness of Being. There's from the 80s, that movie, the movie version of the book. It's a wonderful story, but people are like, or I've seen Dr. Zhivago, and it's like,
Oh, I just watched Dr. Zhivago the other
oh,
day,
what a
actually.
beautiful love story.
It's a beautiful love story. I gotta admit, I'm like, wow, this is really long. It has like the love story is interesting, and like those snowy landscapes.
Yes,
I'm already drawing snowy landscapes all the time, but it was just those like barren wastelands. And there was
yes,
one shot with just like a corpse frozen onto like a fence post that
right.
really was just powerful to me.
Yeah, that's the thing. But you learn those things, and there's certain images you just don't forget.
Yeah,
Like I'm a big Kubrick fan.
sure. Yeah, of course.
And I can't, and I hate to admit that the only one I haven't seen. There's one movie of his I haven't seen. I
I'm
haven't. There's one of, well, there's
definitely missing one or two.
I'm missing. Um, I forget the name, but it's with the subtitle "The Day That," or "How to Bomb," and no, the bomb.
Oh,
I love it.
Doctor Strangelove, or How I
That's
Learned
the
to Stop
only one I
Worrying and
haven't
Love the Bomb,
seen.
or
Yeah, that's the
whatever.
only one I haven't seen. I'm like really embarrassed to say that to people when they say you love Kubrick because that's a classic. But I
Sure.
mean, I love Lolita. Um,
Lolita's good. I liked Lolita too.
Bear,
I do really like How to Straight Doctor Strangelove too.
yeah, Lolita. I think they kept telling Stanley Kubrick not to do it because I think he has like 60 something double entendres in that film, and they were telling Stanley it's going to be career suicide. Don't do this thing.
I
And
listened to this one podcast, Blank Check, and they talk about movies like I'm sorry, directors' careers, and they go
right,
through each and every movie. And they were talking about Lolita, and they said that Kubrick was like, if I had known what I had to go through to make Lolita, I wouldn't have made Lolita. Because the amount of times they said like the double entendres, the times he just couldn't show sex, even though that's in the book. The amount of times he had to like be very subtle about every single thing. He's like, the amount of hard work I put into that movie, the amount of hassle I had to go through.
and the actress Susan Lyon, I think she was legitimately like 14 or 15.
It
Like
was She was pretty young.
she was like
Yeah,
14. I mean, she was like 14 or 15. She wasn't like 18 years old acting 14. She was quite young. So that was another thing because she didn't look. And the thing is that she didn't look it. She looked like, she was like 18.
sure.
So it's like these little things. But he's a guy that I always enjoy. Even Barry Lyndon, which nobody ever talks about. I love that film. Ryan O'Neal's
Sure.
such a schmuck in that film. By the time you see what happens to him, you're like, good, you deserve it, and you
Yeah,
feel
get
bad
out
for
of
his
here.
wife, and you get out of here, you loser. But I mean, that's, and all those costumes were like original costumes from the time that he had the cast wear, and to get those low light candle shots, he actually had Nikon invent a low light lens that had like a 0.3 aperture, something ridiculously created specifically for that film because he wanted to shoot in real candlelight, not fake candlelight. Just crazy stuff.
Yeah,
I don't mean to segue about Kubrick. I just,
I
but
I
you
love
learn,
comics. I love movies. I'll talk about it. I'll talk about comics and movies.
yeah, man. So I'm curious, what, like artistically, or just maybe just growing up, like, do you have any comics that are influences? Is it all one big influence? Like, sort of seems like with movies, or are there certain artists or um, storytellers that you look at and you say, oh yeah, I learned a lot, or this person was really influential to me.
My best guess is that my two most influentials are Mike Mignola and a artist, a Japanese artist named Hirohiko Araki. He does JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. If you've heard of that, it's a very
Yes,
long running one.
yes, like
Uh,
30 something years or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Those two are probably my most like I can really see my work in their stuff because of my heavy use of blacks and also my enjoyment of lean figures that are. I never feel like I focus too much on movement, which a lot of artists do. I'm much more interested in composition. I'm very focused on getting just the right pose, the right like perspective. I really want to be accurate in that way. I don't care as much about creating a sense of movement, but I really care about page composition and how the eye travels across a page. I really want to control the reader as best as I can, so they know what they're doing and there's a general flow to the page. Because I've read some books that don't. There's this one book that I really like that I've been reading right now called Blade of the Immortal. And the interesting thing about Blade of the Immortal is it's another manga, and the artist thought it would be very interesting, instead of doing the flip or just printing it left to right, he wanted to leave it in the Western style, but take all of the panels and have them laid out correctly for American audiences. And that's very interesting because it kind of makes it harder to read because the flow of the page doesn't click.
Okay.
But his work's so good that I keep reading it, but I find it a harder thing to read because there's something completely subconscious about how the page doesn't flow like it's supposed to. That I haven't actually seen too many of the pages that have been like unaltered. But there's something about just like taking these images and seeing what they're like, just visualizing what they were supposed to look like, then understanding like, oh, that's how it's going to flow. But because we broke the flow and had to switch them to the other side, that it kind of like makes it a harder read to me.
Well, the thing is, I think a lot of people try to do like what Jack Kirby did as far as emotion goes, and I think that that's a really hard trick to pull. So, but you see a lot of the greats. There's not a lot of motion. It's a setup. I mean, you look like the Hernandez brothers, or guys like like that, like where they're like there's a reason for those panels and they speak, and there's not sometimes there's movement, like sometimes you see Maggie like going and whatever, that can be kind of comedic like a cartoon, but a lot of times it's just like they're just focusing on a face talking, and that's it. There's not any movement. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah,
Otherwise, though, oh, I'm
mhm.
sorry. No, you said. I was just gonna say. Otherwise, though, I'm sure that I've been affected by an artist, just that I can't remember because I try to read a lot, and I think that I take a lot of the information in, and that it's just kind of there floating around, and that like drawing something this way is not consciously because of something else, but it probably is. Like,
I've met a few cartoonists that have told me that too. That like, I asked them, "Did you intentionally mean to do this?" Like, no, but I just felt it was the right thing to do at that time.
yeah,
And that reminds me a lot of like if you like for like a couple semesters very early in my college days, I was going to major in English, and I seemed to find a lot of professors that found a lot of stuff in literature that I'm like, okay, I don't see it.
oh no, no, yeah, yeah, yeah.
like Hemingway and Faulkner, they would really get into these guys and what the symbolism was. And I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure Hemingway was slinging a bunch of shots. He wasn't thinking about all the symbolism, man. He was just writing a story. And because he was Ernest Hemingway, like maybe his earlier stuff, but like, and or Faulkner, it's like, I don't really see it. Maybe I'm young and stupid, but I don't see it. I still
It,
didn't see it.
it was one of those classic things, like in my AP Lit class, because that's really the furthest into English I ever went, because I didn't take any courses in colleges. Was like one of those classic jokes of, we were talking about one book and they talk about how the curtains are blue and how it means that they're sad, and I just never understood that, especially now, even more so now with like art tricks. It's very much like, no, we were just kind of doing our best. Maybe we had an idea that's kind of like that, but it really made me much more disillusioned to the whole like this artist writing a really well written play that is deep on many layers. It's like, no, the person was just kind of smart and they did put those layers in, but it wasn't like on purpose, except for sometimes.
Yeah. You familiar with the jazz performer Miles Davis?
The name's familiar, but
Okay,
I don't
well,
really
well,
know any.
he's a guy like basically influenced and changed jazz.
Hmm.
He had a career 50s. He went to Juilliard, and he was a black musician. He came from Kansas City, but his father was a dentist. He was wealthy growing up. He rode horses, and he went to Juilliard. He got sent to Juilliard, but he really went to New York because he wanted to like meet like other jazz musicians. But he was in a class one day, and the teacher said that the reason why blacks play the blues is because they've had a hard life, and they've had, they've had to deal with slavery, and they play the blues because of this hard life. And he got up and he said, let me tell you something. He goes, I grew up rich. My dad's a dentist. I have horses. He goes, my grandfather was rich. I don't play the blues because I'm sad. I play the blues because I like to play the blues. And it's that same thing where it's like, oh no, they do it because of this and this. And he's like saying no. and,
Oh.
and then he left Juilliard not too long after that. He's like, these people ain't telling me nothing. He learned how to like read music and study music and understand composers. But he said after a while, he just left because he said they weren't teaching him anything. They were teaching him a bunch of stupid stuff that wasn't true.
I felt very similarly about college. Like not completely, because like I learned plenty of technical stuff. They made me draw, and I met like great people there, and I met good college
Right.
stuff. But every class, not every class, many classes, we
Right.
would have to talk about what we did, and we'd have to present it to the class, and then we'd do I'm blanking on the word, but like we're supposed to dissect it as a class. We're supposed to talk about it. Like, why are you doing this? What could you have done better? And sometimes these people just making stuff up on the fly, and I'm not interested in doing it. Like talking about like, well, I did this because of my mother. Or I did this because I wanted it to feel like I'm sad.
Right.
And I used to make my wife's a graphic designer, and I used to make fun of graphic designers in school because I'm gonna really upset any graphic designer watching this. But in the middle of class, when it's stuff like that, when it's time to like talk about a piece, it's time to dissect it and talk about what's good and bad about it. Those people are vultures. The one person like a chicken seeing red, they see one thing wrong and then they just immediately peck it apart. Where I'm very when it came to my drawings, it was very much like, guys, this is just what I drew. I could have something better. It could be something worse. Sometimes you have good opinions on it, um, but I don't want to take it as seriously as you guys are. I don't want to take it as seriously as about this because I do feel that art is just kind of innate. You learn as many things as possible. You try your best to do it um, in a technical sense, just to nail what you want to nail. But I don't know. At the end of the day, you're just drawing a picture. You're just trying to get what's inside of you out, and there's no right or wrong about it.
Yeah, I think that some people can get, excuse my French, too far up their own butt
Yeah.
with art. And I've seen it, like I said, I'm not artistic. I can't draw anything above stick people. I've read a lot of comics, so I think I know what looks good, but storytelling and what art you use is really subjected to the story. So, you know, I love John, like Jack Kirby, but Jack Kirby is not the guy that can draw every story, so you have to learn these things. But and I don't know if you had a chance to read Nolan Mascaro's as a cartoonist.
I have not.
Okay, it's a collection of scenes throughout his life. It's a really great book, by the way. But there's a story where he's at um, a gallery showing, and this person's art is just taking words and putting them on paintings, like the F word or something or damn, and it's just paintings. And he has a flashback to when he was like young, like in high school or something, and he did something similar. And the professor's like, Noah, this is not a painting. This is a billboard. Paintings do not have words in them. And then the class like, yes, yes, I see what you're saying, professor. And they're all like vulturing him. And then he flashes back to the future because it's like that thing where like some teacher, some professor told you something about art and why your art is bad. And then you see somebody that's actually having a gallery showing and actually selling this art, doing what you did. And so I think there's this thing of like, especially people who are professors and teachers, it's like this is the way, and it's like a dogma, and this is the only
Yeah.
way it can be, and it has to be this way because it's been this way forever, and it's this way. But it's art. I mean, people, I mean, I see Jackson Pollock, I see splatters of paint, but people see real art there. Am I wrong or right? No, to me, but I mean, somebody will pay tens of thousands of dollars for those things, and it speaks to people. So at the end of the day, I think, especially in the academic setting, there's so much of this. It has to be, these are the rules, and they must follow these rules. And these rules have been existing for hundreds of years, and you cannot break them. And it's like, well, just because it's been around for hundreds of years doesn't mean it's right.
That's the whole, that's the whole point of Fymbulwynter. But in school, where there's always a discussion of high and low art, like high being gallery art, art that has a purpose, art that's emotionally meaningful, and low art being just like a graphic design thing, comic books,
Right.
all of that. And I never understood the point in differentiating it, because anything can elicit a response, especially since I don't know. It's just somebody trying their best. Every single one of us are just trying our best. So I don't
Right.
see the point in differentiating it. A lot of my work, my art stuff, like my non-comic work, which I haven't gotten to do in a while, is very much based on um, just kind of spitting in the face of the whole idea. It's very. I tend to depict something I would say in a low art, I don't know, concept, followed by a high art presentation, or at least that's what I'm attempting.
Right.
Well,
Well, no, somebody would have told me that, I would have said, "What do you think about Liechtenstein?"
yeah,
Because he took low art and made it fine art and didn't pay these guys a penny for ripping off their art and sold that art for tons of money.
I there's something nice about art, and honestly, just anything. It's just sometimes there's just an image, and you think, yes, like yeah, that's good. I like that. Who knows why? I don't know the science of it. It's just
Right.
something clicks with you, and that's all there is to it. And that's very much how photography works. There's just you do your best to try to capture something, and you look at it, and you're like, yeah, good. That's good. I did a good job on that one. I like that one.
Right. Yeah. So okay, cool. So I wanted to talk about Fimbulwinter also because you do have a Kickstarter for it, and
Yeah.
congratulations on being fully funded.
Yeah,
Um,
and now I've hit a weird point of being like I was nervous, like oh I don't know if I'll make it. Now I'm nervous, like oh no, if too many people order, I don't have enough books. I'm gonna have to order more books.
yeah, but I think you did it smart because I think what a lot of people don't understand when they do a Kickstarter, especially if you're like early in your career, is that you are really unknown quantity, and people are basically taking a risk with you to make sure that you're actually going to do the work that's going to be fulfilled, that they're going to get their books on a timely basis. And I think a lot of people like do these like kind of bigger projects than they really are ready for. And you kept it very small, very low level to get fully funded. It's fully funded. It's past being fully funded. So, and I noticed that with these Kickstarters, that once they're fully funded, people are like, "Oh, it's fully funded. Well, maybe now I'll actually get the books." So I think you did it really smart. I think a lot of people start off trying to do something kind of maybe too big, and you did it small, and it's going to get fulfilled. So people that buy it and get it know, okay, this person's serious about continuing the series. It's not just the first issue of an ongoing series. It's like you can get 3 issue chunks. And by the way, if anybody hasn't read these books yet, I think the first issue is 40 something pages. The second issue is like 60, 64 pages. The third issue is like, I didn't count, it's like in the 30, 40s or 50 pages. These are
Yeah,
chunks, big chunks of comics. It's not like 22 pages and one and done. These are big chunks. So if somebody buys all 3 issues, you're basically getting like at the point where it's almost like a half of a graphic novel. And I think people have more buy-in when they say, okay, well, there's 3 issues of this. I can take a flyer for relatively low cost. The books are done, so I don't have to worry about this person figuring out like, oh, I know I gotta draw it. So I really commend you for that because I think that's the way to go, especially if you're starting out. If you're established star, it's different. You have that clout. But if not, I think that you did it the right way.
yeah. I tried very hard with it, especially with the whole drawing it in the first place. It was I worked very hard on that first chapter, and it ended up being something like 40 pages, and then I had to start on the second chapter, and it ended up being 60 pages and whatever. And that's when I finally was like, you know what? This isn't moving fast enough. I should switch over to digital. And I put everything on Webtoons and Tapas, and it's already been on my website. But I really wanted to make sure that I had something. I had something substantial that I could give to people, because like you said, it's too much of a random quantity, because like you can read my book online, uh, but it's just one book, and so many webcomics die so easily, because it's just a sea of content, and you just try to make yourself visible, and it's practically impossible.
Right.
Like Webtoons and Tapas help, because at least it's on a place that you go to read comic books. It's there's a ton of them there, but yours is one of them, and people will see them, especially if you luck out and Webtoons or Tapas like put you on the front page for some reason.
Right.
Um, but when I started off with just my website, it was very intimidating, because you're just a website. No one knows about you. No one knows anything about it. I used what is it called? Topwebcomics.com.
Hmm.
They list all the webcomics. They have like a voting page to get where you can like vote to the top 100 webcomics online or whatever. I've never beaten that. I think the highest I ever get is like around the 700 600s. But I noticed on my website that was getting me readers. So it's very much each each stage of my comic is just me building on the last stage and trying to do something more, because it was very much okay. I've written the first chapter. What do I do? Okay, I write the second chapter. Okay, I've finished the second chapter. What should I do next? I'm worried about it not being fast enough. I'll try doing digital, see if that speeds me up, and I'll
Hmm.
put it on Webtoons and Tapas. Okay, I finished the third chapter. What do I do next? It's like, well, that's 3 books. That's like 150 pages. I could probably get that printed and try to do a Kickstarter. And I had some success too with like getting it printed in general and like putting it in stores. That's how you found it at Gutter Pop. And um, I did the local Buffalo Comic Con, and then I did Rice. So right now, I guess it's just setting up these goals, these small goals that you just keep trying to roll down a hill like a snowball, trying to just keep getting more. The latest thing I've been doing, other than the Kickstarter, is I've been trying to work with other artists to get like guest covers, because I think that's just kind of cool, and that opens up my work to other audiences that these artists have, and maybe they'd like my thing too.
Right.
Um, one of them I still have to post, because I've been bad about it. But I worked with this. Her name's she's on Instagram. Her name's like Daria Space, and she makes these bright, colorful, but dark subject matter pieces.
Right.
Like I think they're all gouache, but she had these series that they always stuck with me, where they're like Slipknot people, but they're
Okay.
like covered in like kawaii, like Hello Kitty stickers and stars and stuff. And I'm like, there's just something about the work. I'm like, I love how bright it is. I love bright colors when it comes to my character. So I reached out to her, and I
Hmm.
asked her just to do like a guest cover. I just started reaching out to another artist. I think it's like Kevin Catalano. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know. For space, he's a space. What's it called?
Space Knights.
Space Knights. Yeah, I know him.
I,
Yeah,
I I
he's pretty good.
randomly saw that ad, and I'm like, that is great art, and it
It
kind of
is.
matches stuff that I'm doing. So I was reaching out to him to see if he would do it, and we just got started on that. But there's just I like setting up little goals, and Kickstarter, I'm like $300 pays for like some shipping, and it pays for the books, and it was very much like that seems fine. I'd love to set it to high goals like $5,000, $10,000, but it would that's just not possible. I wouldn't make it. But I could make it 300, and I did. So
Yeah, I think, but I think the thing you're trying to build it for the long term,
yeah,
and a lot of people think that the long term is quick. There's a reason. There's that saying that I spent the last 10 years becoming an overnight success. I
sure.
mean, well, no offense, like no Mascara is like my favorite cartoonist.
No,
Please,
there
please
are
take no,
plenty of artists
please
that
take me
suddenly
no
just
offense, but he's a guy that just grinded and grinded and grinded and grinding, making comics for local newspapers, self-published stuff. Even like even he said like his early Blammo. like he talked about his first. He came out with that collection. He says, "Oh, these are the comics that I drew when I was learning to make comics." Like he's like, yeah, it's rough. But some guys just you put in the grind and they put in the work, but they get better. But you're building it for the long term, and I think you never know like who's looking at your work too. But sometimes the comics have always been viral, even before the days of the internet. Because I'm going to show my age, people bought comics because a buddy of yours that liked comics liked the comic, or the store owner, if they were a cool store and store owner and they were like pretty good taste and they knew your taste, they would recommend, hey, you may want to try this out. It's all viral and word of mouth. So doing this to increase your exposure and to get that word of mouth going and all that, that's key. That's how you do it for the long run. Just,
I
just my opinion.
uh, it's all I can do to hope for the best when it comes to it, because this is what I want to do. This is what I care about. There's something inherent about it that I can't
And,
stop.
right. And I
Um,
was also going to say also, I think that having a physical copy is really key.
Me too.
I know everybody thinks that, I mean, I know that we're more into digital age and comics look great on the iPad, the colors pop, and Comixology does a lot of business, but there's something about having a physical product. It's like photographers, like professional photographers, they sell you on that print and they try to sell you in a print. People are like, no, I got the digital image. I have on my phone or my computer. I can share it. But if you actually make a nice print and you show it to like clients, they're like, oh, holy shit. There's something about that physical thing there. And they're like, okay, we got to frame it nice. We got to hang it up. There's something about that physical print that you get, especially when it's presented nicely, that nobody's going to get a TV and like put a JPEG on their wall of that thing. They want to see the real thing. There's something about the actual physical thing and how good it looks that sticks with people, and people will pay more for it. I'm old school. I mean, I like technology. I like to keep up with technology, even the technology I use, but I like physical comics. I like the experience of holding a comic in my hand and actually reading it, and especially for the storytellers that use that last panel, that last page where you gotta like turn it over to see what happened. That art that seems to kind of like sometimes be lost. You saw that a lot in the 80s. And just sometimes you open a little page spread and you're like, oh, that looks really great. You know, those are things that are really hard to duplicate on a digital. And like I said, I just think there's something about it. Now, I know people that use digital because they have space constraints and whatever, and I get it. I'm not knocking
yeah.
it, but I think if I had my druthers, I would rather get the physical copy. Alice Graham, she's serializing her book on Substack. I'm on her Substack, and
Okay.
then she collects a bunch of pages and she prints a magazine style comic. I don't read it every day that she posts. I wait till the comic is collected and then I read it as one big chunk in that physical magazine size book, and I know I enjoy it more.
That's I that's how I do it with a lot of stuff. I've always I know the amount of times I have been told that my work has something physically, but not like in a picture, is very high. It'd be like if I got a nickel every time that was mentioned to me, I'd have like $10 maybe. But like I would show in art shows, and my work would. This was just my fine art
Right,
work, and they were just like, "There's something it has. There's an energy it has that I
right.
didn't think it had when I saw the picture of it, but when I'm in the presence of it, um, I see it, I feel it." And so I know that at least that I've been told this many times. So I always really cared about it being physical. I mean, like I collect DVDs, I collect books, so there's just something that makes it feel more real to me, just in general, to have it printed. My wife said when I started drawing this dang thing, um, that I wasn't making a web comic. I was just making a comic that happened to be on the web, because
Yeah.
it's just there's something about the physical medium that just I don't know. It's more present. It,
Well,
I'd say.
I agree with you. There is something about seeing a lot of art in person printed that there's something that doesn't translate to digital. I think I don't know what it is. That's something for the scholars to talk about. But
I get the same way, honestly, about just in general, like that. It's why I like owning movies, because I get worried in some way that like if I own a movie, I own it. I can feel it. I can touch it. I can smell it. I can taste it. Whatever. But if I own it digitally, it's just it's not real. It doesn't feel real, and it
Well,
could be taken away from me or something like that.
exactly. Well, that's the reason why more and more I've been like more open to buying DVDs, because in the early days of streaming, it's like, yeah, you can see any movie on streaming, but now it's like, well, you can only see this movie if you're on this service, or as opposed to this service, as opposed to that service, and so you can't see everything. It's like when Netflix had everything, you could see everything, but now you can't.
I very much care that my books are read by people, and there's some sort of idea like, what if I someday, um, it, someday I'm super successful. I'm just rolling in money, but I don't want to maintain the Fymbulwynter website because I don't know. There's just some reason. I like the idea that at least people around this world that care about Fymbulwynter own Fymbulwynter physically, and I'm not taking it away from them. I like knowing that these physical the same thing. I say this sometimes, and I guess it's a bit morbid, but there's something about having like a physical like paperback or a physical piece of media, like that author someday will die, but
Right.
I have something, a piece of them, something special that they made that I care about too, and there's something that I like having it with me physically there. um yeah.
That old Dark Horse series, Cheval Noir, it used to be an
Never
anthology
even heard
series.
of it.
Okay, this is something they did in the 80s. It was an anthology series, but it had Mobius, Dave Stevens, Philippe Drouet. It had all these stories, and it was all creator owned. It's not available on Comixology or on Dark Horse's website. It's never been collected in trades, or if it has been collected in 20, 30 years. It'll never be reprinted, and those books
Sure.
are hard to find. It's hard to find the dollar bin, much just they're just hard to find, and people want to charge money for them. I think it was available one time online because I found a site that actually has them as CBRs and PDFs. But it's stuff that like you'll never find it because they'll never be reprinted. So there's something about that whole thing of like it physically exists somewhere, because if you really want to read it, you can find it. I mean, there's certain comics that fans scan the pages and put them up on their website for free because you can't find these comics. It's just so other fans can read them. So there is a point. I understand your point about having that stuff available, because when it's not, um, you're like, man, you can't find it online. It's like then you got to do the physical hunt. But at least if you can get it physically and hold on to it, then you don't have to worry about
Yeah,
that.
no one can take it. It's like how you were talking about the Dark Horse comic. One that I recently heard about was Rom the Space Knight, and how he was like a comic made just for toys,
Right.
and then somebody worked their butt off and made like an important story for Rom the Space Knight, and he affected all the Marvel universe.
Mm-hmm.
And I love X-Men. I specifically love Chris Claremont's run, and I read this one portion of it where the dire wraiths come and they're
Right.
out of nowhere and you don't know who they are. And I only found out later that they were like a Rom the Space Knight villain. But
Right.
because of weird licensing issues, Rom the Space Knight will probably never be printed again. And it's
Nope.
just so interesting that some writer worked their butt off. They made Rom a hero that, and and it's just something that you won't get. So
Rom had like a 50-issue run. I think they did like an actual series finale, and I agree with you. And they've always tried to reboot that character with, I think, IDW and different independent. I think Dark Horse, and people have tried, and for whatever reason they count on. But yeah, there was somebody who did this major story with Rom, and you're right. Now you can't get it. You have to find it in the dollar bins or back issues.
the only reason I even know about it is specifically because I learned that like Rogue had some very big character arc that she finally like concluded in Rom the Space Knight that you just don't even get in the main X-Men issues. That I think
No,
is just funny, in that dark sense. That's like, yeah, it's really important to her. She had this adventure. No one will ever read it. It's not collected anywhere.
right.
Um,
There's a lot of comics like that that are like, either that or the publisher has no interest. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with these Lego characters called Bionicles.
I am very aware of Bionicle.
Okay, my oldest son, 27, he's the one that got the comic bug.
Okay.
He loves Bionicles. Loves Bionicles. And we were at this comic show, and I'm looking through the stats, and I'm like, hey, Chris, there's some Bionicle comics here. Like, there's a miniseries. And it's like, oh wow. And he's like, hey, there's another one. And this guy had like complete like 4 or 5 miniseries of Bionicles from when they were printing the comics. I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago.
Who knows?
Yeah. And he's like, no, Dad, and he's like, buy another one. So he ended up buying the guy for 20 issues. He paid like $30, and it wasn't even the money. It's nothing, but with nothing money, he goes, Dad, you understand? He goes, I told him, there's fan websites that scan these comics and put them up so other fans can read them, because you can't find these comics. These things will never be published again. Lego has no interest in republishing these things whatsoever. If they do it, they'll do new comics. And and I told them, I've been going with you the cons for 10 years. And this is the first time I've ever found Bionicle comics everywhere. So I told them the whole thing is, they're cheap. I'm glad you got them, but it could be another 10 years or more before you ever see these things again. It's like they were just there, and he is happy as a clam, and he's a part of like a Bionicles group. So when he was like taking pictures of what he said, these guys were like, where'd you find these things? Where'd you find them? And there were like 20 issues, and they were all complete like miniseries sets. And it's that thing where like you can't find it. And it is frustrating, because it's not even a lot of money. You just can't find it anywhere. And it's like, if you find one in the wild, you're like, I gotta get it, because I may never see this thing again. And I live in Miami, and Miami is not like New York or Boston or some cities where you have like a lot of old independent comics and all. Miami's like big two, and a lot of speculating, a lot of stuff. So when you find these things like here locally, you're like, oh my God, it's like, this is like getting a little lotto ticket, and you're just going to pick it up for $1. And you're like, oh, $5. And you're like, dude, you don't know. Give it to me.
Because I buy comics on eBay, I'm constantly like looking up comics that I'm interested in getting, and just finding out that they're like hundreds of dollars for no reason, just because they're out of print or the print speculation. So
Yes.
it's very much like, I know that it's, if you find something, you gotta jump on it. There, like, every once in a while I haven't jumped on it, and I've only regretted it.
Yeah. I mean, there's that.
Stuff like
Yeah.
that.
You gotta be like, you gotta sit there and be like, oh yeah, it's like $15, and that's pretty good price, but I don't know if I'm spending that. Yeah. Now it's like, done. You're right, because
Gotta do it.
we gotta do it before somebody else grabs it. I mean,
I'll just be burned later.
no, I mean, I try to get good deals on
Oh yeah.
stuff, but at the same time, some stuff is like, man, it's like, you're right. It's like, I've been looking for this book for 5 years, and it just popped on me in the wild. It's like, I'm not going to see this again. Somebody's going to be smarter than me and grab this thing, and it's not going to be here again. So yeah, I agree with you. It's that's the thing now about collecting all this stuff, especially that's like 20, 30 years old, 40 years old. It's like, you just can't even find it. And you're right, because it's 40 years old, it's automatically out of print, and therefore it must be worth $500.
Gosh, yeah.
And it's like, I mean, like, I remember going to a store, and somebody had Deathmate Black. They wanted $25 for it, because it's the first appearance of Gen 13. And I'm like, dude, I go, that should probably detract from the price. And then I found it at this con. I found it for $2. I mean, I already have it because I paid $1
That
for it
seems
somewhere.
about right.
Well, I was gonna ask you, so are you doing your work now and mostly in Procreate online, or the reason I ask is that I saw your TikTok videos, and you do a pretty good job with them, and that has to be done, and I can see how it's done digitally, but a lot of your work looks like it was done physically before too. And I'm not an art expert, so I can't tell you. So I don't know if you do a mix of both, or you mentioned doing stuff in Procreate. So have you switched it all digital?
I my first 2 issues completely physical. I have all the pages. Because I love inking specifically. I really love just.
Oh, I can tell.
I love inking.
Oh no, it looks good.
But it just it bothers me. I just need to go faster. I want to be faster. I want to get more done. I feel like it's probably unhealthy, especially just in this modern day, how it's just we have that grind, that cranking stuff out. But I just want to be faster so then people can read my stuff and enjoy it.
Right.
And to hopefully get more people to look at it if I'm doing it faster. So I did make the switch over to Procreate on my iPad. And I do that pretty much for every page, but for covers, I still draw the drawing and then I ink it digitally. But other than that, yeah, everything's digital. A lot of referencing, uh, just
Well, I
straight
think
on the
that's
iPad.
one thing that's fine. One of my a friend of mine, a guy who's work I like a lot, Jeff Manley. He's a cartoonist out of Traverse City. But what he does is speed up. He does blue line pencils on paper, and then he just scans it, and then he does all the finishes and does everything in Procreate. And he says that's the same thing that you had mentioned. He wanted to work faster. He wanted to get the work out faster, and it was taking him too long. He was getting frustrated and kind of felt like he was like stuck in mud. So this way, it allows him to get the work done at the speed that he wants to do it, and that is more conducive to him drawing. And you're right. It's that thing about how much time you want to spend, or can you spend, you know?
The other problem I had, and problem, but when I drew the first two issues, I wasn't sure about like sizing. I did my best,
Right,
but I got these huge pieces of paper, so they're big drawings. And then I had the problem of I have a small scanner, so I thought I'd like scan it in pieces and then put it together online. But for some reason, the lines never match up. I don't know why. It's probably something involving the scan slash how the pencil is on the page and stuff like that. So I would have to take it to a specialty shop, and then I'd have to pay another like $100, $70 because of each page being like a
right,
$1.50 to scan it at a high res. And
right,
then I'd have to take it inside, and I'd have to go and clean up the res because it would get like little specks of dirt on occasion, slash some of my pencil lines or some of my eraser bits just didn't get off the page like I thought. And
right.
it was just all of these things that just kept adding up and kept taking longer, especially since the first thing I wanted to do was to actually draw the whole dang thing. So that's what I did. Like the first issue, I did it all, and that's when I published it. The second issue, I did all of the past, and then I did all of the present, and then I posted each of those individually. And then the third one is I do it in about 7 page increments because I just want to try doing it faster. And I'm like 7 pages at least kind of gets you a good amount of story or a
Hmm.
good amount of art that it feels like it's okay, especially since I try to do it every month.
Hmm.
But it just cuts out that like that big middle time of just digital editing, digital editing, scanning, um, because now I can just draw right on the iPad, and it makes a page that took, I don't know, 12 hours to make, now take 7.
And I think some people really don't want to like adapt because they think the image loses something more than like, I mean, if you can draw quickly and the way you draw, you can do it in pencil, that's fine. That's your preference, fine. But I think a lot of people get stuck in this thing where like, no, but that's not the traditional way of doing it, and therefore you can't do it. And it's like, man, if you got tools that make your life simpler and you come out with a product that is good, who cares? Like, who cares how the sausage is really made as long as the sausage is tasty?
Yeah,
That's my opinion.
I would really like to do it traditionally. I'd really like to, but it's
Hmm.
very much like I just have to admit that I'm not fast enough currently. Like if I were hired by some studio and had money and had time, like yeah, I'd go back to traditional if I had the time. But this is all free. This is all just me doing it.
Right.
So I have to just cut corners as many places as I can.
Yeah,
Like
but that makes sense. I'm sorry, time is precious,
yeah,
and if you're a single guy and you don't have any responsibilities other than to yourself, then you have more time. As you mentioned, you're married, so there are. I mean, I've been married 23 years, so it's like there are time obligations that you do have, and there are other things that you do have, and you can't spend 14 hours a day drawing, unless it's like your professional gig, and even then, you'll burn yourself out. Um, so I agree. It's just more, I think it makes sense to me. It's just, I just think that sometimes people think that somehow you're losing the spirit of the art by doing it digitally. It's like, man, it's like when Bob Dylan and Miles Davis started bringing electric instruments into folk and jazz, and all the purists were like, and horror, like, oh, it's not real folk music if you're
Oh,
playing with electric guitar. And it's like, man, nobody cares. Young people listen to electric guitars is what I'm going to play, and nobody cares. But the purists are like, oh, that's not real folk music. Oh, yeah, it is. It's like he got paid for it.
um, I made fun of a friend the other day in a nice way, because she was saying that she watched all of a movie on TikTok because she watched it in 3 minute intervals on TikTok because some people are just looking for instant views or whatever. So they just take a movie, take it into 3 minute chunks, and put it on TikTok. You can
Wow.
just watch it on a playlist. And she watched it all, and I'm like, Martin Scorsese just puked because you told me that's what you're doing. David Lynch just died because you told me that's how you watched this movie, because it makes me think about those guys. Like I love movies. I love going to the theaters, but sometimes people are just saying you don't experience a film unless it's like on the screen in the theater. But it's like, no, I can really experience a movie on my DVD. I made
Yeah.
fun of her because I don't know if you can really experience the best case scenario of a movie in 3 minute increments on TikTok. But like,
A movie has
too precious.
pacing elements and it has structure, and this act is going to be 5 minutes long. And it's like listening to a song 3 minutes in, and then tomorrow you listen to the last 2 minutes of the
Yeah,
song. I mean, like the Godfather films are my favorite films. I won't even start
sure.
there because I'm like sick with those films. I mean, I'm like one of those hardcore dudes that can recite dialogue. But I remember Coppola was talking about how they were doing the time shifting for Godfather 2 between the present and the past. And he said at first they did 10-minute switches and it didn't work. And he said when they did it around 20 minutes or so, 20, 25 minutes, that's when it really clicked. So you have to watch like those segments that long for the full effect to hit you, because there's so much that's laid out in that segment that there's a payoff at each little segment, and then at the end there's a big payoff. And so I don't know. I mean, like in mid dialogue, you get cut off. Like if you're Pulp Fiction, do you have Samuel L. Jackson said, "You read the Bible," and then it stops,
And I click over to the next page, and
and then you're like, and then you're yeah, but I mean,
I know.
I,
I That's why I made fun of her.
I sound like an old fuddy duddy, but
Wow.
there's a reason why these movies are certain movies are. I mean, if you're talking about Fast and the Furious, who cares?
No,
I mean that's just planes being parachuted from the sky on and
they're
on space
basically
stations.
superheroes at this point. They're crazy.
Yeah, I mean, but that's different. There's not a lot of thinking going on there. But if you're actually like trying to craft a film and say, okay, there's this act is this long, and there's a reason why it's this long, and maybe got to edit to make it shorter or do something longer. But if you're doing 3 minutes intro, it's just you just kill it.
Not to make it about me, but flashbacks and stuff with The Godfather, it definitely didn't affect me. But the whole pacing of Fimbulwinter, I really thought it mattered that I needed to show how we got here, but that the story really takes place post Ragnarok. And I struggled with the idea because not everyone knows Norse mythology, and like some of those names are hard to stick. So I really I became very enamored with just doing like the first half of my book in the past and then switching over to the present. But I'm very careful about where I want it to how far I want to show what I'm showing and how I want to transition to the past. I'm sorry, to the present, because I really need it to flow well. It's the same feeling. Like I can't just do it in the middle of a cut. That's why I feel bad about like splitting it up into like 7 page increments, except I do time those 7 pages as best as I can with natural flow. That's why I don't really, it's not a hard 7 pages. It's a 5 to 7 page range, depending on the flow of action or whatever is happening in the story. If it feels
Right.
like a natural stopping point.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is all about you.
Gross.
Well, okay. I'm just saying that we're having a
I
conversation
know.
about you and your art. So, if any insights you have into what you do in your process, that's what this conversation, a lot of it is about. Just to me, this is the interesting stuff. Like, I don't want to sit there and say, "Whoa, what was the first comic you read?" No, tell me about
I know
like,
that.
well, I mean, sure. I mean, I think everybody read comic knows that one, but
Yeah.
it's more like those are lazy questions I consider. It's more these conversations about art and what you're trying to do and your thinking behind it. I think that people who are serious comic book readers that really like good comics, they appreciate that idea of like, that the thought process behind and what you're trying to do. I think that's the stuff that's, I mean, it's interesting to me, and I'm not even an artist, but I find this whole idea of the creation of it would be film or be music or something, that whole creation and what goes into creating this thing and what you're trying to do. And to me, I find that the really fascinating part. And sometimes it's just starts so happens like I think in that Beatles film, that one that was premiered on Disney Plus, um, and they showed how Get Back was like being done, and it's just Paul McCartney hitting a guitar. He's like just mumbling mumble jumbo, and he starts going get back, and that's how the genesis of the song. And it's like, holy shit, you just pulled that out of thin air.
That's what I really love the most about the creative process. There was this one time I was playing D&D, and I had this character that I loved. I loved him so much, and I don't get to play as him anymore. But there was just this one moment in time where I learned that he liked yogurt, and there was something about that discovery that just felt good because it wasn't there was there was no conscious thought as to why this guy likes yogurt, but there was something inherent. There was just something, some form of the creative process where you finally discover something, as if out of just like the ether, that is just crucial and integral to the story, and that's what I like the most. That's what I really, really love about like writing in general. These moments where you just suddenly, it's not you. It's like you're channeling some sort of like the great subconscious or something. There's just
Yeah,
something that's in you that's telling you you have to do this because like whenever you find that stuff, it feels good. Like there was this Valley. Uh, she is generally speaking, kind of, I don't want to spoil anything, kind of the main antagonist of my book, though that may change. But at the moment, she's the main antagonist. And she wasn't, when I read the book, Valley just for some reason read as a female to me, the Norse mythology book. And then I looked into the mythology again as I'm writing this thing, and I'm like, wait a second, they're male. And there was just something that stuck with me that no, mine's not. Mine really matters that she's female. And then later on at the very end of my third chapter, she does something involving Jormungandr's corpse that also was just one of those inherent thoughts like, oh, this is something important to the character that I'm not consciously choosing, and I don't even know why I'm like choosing it, but this is important, and that's what it feels good about. There's this like pure act of creation that just is that high I'm chasing, that something that something inside of me or something out there that is crucial and integral to this point that you didn't know beforehand. You didn't choose this because you can go to school and learn as many technical things as you want, and you use them all the time. But there's always something good about just it just coming out of you, something automatic.
right. There's something about it that's raw. It's like punk rock. Punk rock is guys getting the cheapest amps with the cheapest guitars. Half of them can barely play. They really can't sing, but there's something about that energy that's there that when you hear it, it's like, oh, this was really good. Like the Sex Pistols. There's something there that you hear and you're like, these are not classically trained musicians. These are not the Beatles that played thousands of hours before their first album ever was produced. These are guys that just
They're
they
just doing
became
it.
they became good musicians later on, but at the time you could just tell they just knew enough to just like thrash, and that's what they were doing. So yeah, they're just doing it, but there's something there that caught the public psyche. And I think, so it is that thing that's really that mystery of like that mystery element of like what's in the ether or what's in your brain or your subconscious. That's always fascinates me because people a lot of times will just cop to the fact of like, I don't know, I just thought that'd be pretty, like you're doing. I
Yeah.
just thought that would be really cool to do at that moment, but I don't know why. And then you can like try to say, well, were you trying to do this? No, I just thought it was really cool.
It's like, if I think about it, like maybe I could figure something out, but why?
Why?
I find it so much more fun that way. Like, when I first came up with Fymbulwynter, I wrote about half of the whole story, thinking that's a good point to stop myself, and we'll see where I'm at. We'll see what happens with this whole journey. We'll see if I make it here. If I make it here, I'll be a different person than I was when I started writing this, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
see what the new person decides. I have ideas about the ending, and what I'd like to do. And certain things have not changed in the years that I've been doing this. But each time I finish a chapter, I reread my outline of the next chapter, and then I thumbnail either the whole chapter or I thumbnail out like chunks. And that's when I have the most, like, not fun. It's not exactly fun, but when I give myself a lot of freedom, because like, what is a paragraph in my outline in my text document? I've done stuff since I started writing it, so it's just kind of me trying to figure out what am I doing now, trying to edit it as I go. It's kind of just a fun, it's a fun jazz where you're just kind of improving each page and trying to make it flow right, while also keeping the general idea of the story but changing it to what it is now. So each time I write a new chapter, I'm kind of actively writing it as I do each page. It's just kind of coming up with things. Yeah.
It's that whole creative process. I'm always fascinated with it because my background is not creative. It's very technical, it's professionally. And so I'm always fascinated and kind of like my wife is very creative, and sometimes we'll think of something and she'll come up with this idea of like, oh, I thought we could do this and decorate this, and I'll look at her and say, how do you do that? She goes, what? I go, how do you think of this stuff? It's like it would take me a day to think of this one thought, and it's like I envy that ability, that people have where they just come up with these ideas, and it's like, damn, how'd you do that? And they don't even know. It just pops in their head, and they're like, here, do this. This is why I like talking about this, because it's like, I guess I'm like looking for a mystery that will never be solved.
Sure.
So anyway, are you? One last question: are you reading anything at this time, like comics?
I am. It's not like fun stuff. Well, it's fun to me. I'm not saying it's
It
like
doesn't matter, man.
I know. So I am reading Blade of the Immortal, that
Right.
manga mentioned. I kind of read that in chunks because I like the story arcs, and then I kind of take breaks. I'm catching up on One Piece because there was a sale at Barnes and Noble, so I got like these omnibuses that I haven't gotten because one. Do you know One Piece at all?
I'm familiar with One Piece, but I haven't read One Piece. My manga reading really started in like 2019. I mean, I had read Bat manga before
Okay.
the which I loved, but it was still Batman.
Yeah.
But my first real manga was Akira.
Sure. Yeah.
And
That's
after
awesome.
that, man, and after that, I was like, oh my God, what am I missing out on? So I've been reading a lot of Tezuka. I've been reading Tatsumi is my favorite. I'm reading a lot of the older stuff. I'm trying to read new stuff, but there's a lot I haven't read. So I'm familiar with it. I've
That's
not read
fair.
it.
But One Piece is very, very, very long. That's the
Right.
thing that everybody mentions. So whenever it gets like done with a big chunk, is usually when I catch up on it. I'm actually reading the Weapon X that you mentioned in the video, the Barry Windsor Smith,
Right.
because you talked about doing that color comparison,
Right.
and it was basically just me being like, why don't I read that? Why haven't I read that? Because it was during 2020 that I went through my whole X-Men phase. I went crazy for X-Men. I read it all. Well, read it all
Right.
is a strong term. I read
Right.
all the Claremont stuff, and then around the 90s is when I check out. And at that same time, Hickman was doing the new reboot, the Hoxpox,
Mm-hmm.
and I was falling in love with that. I think Hoxpox is great, and I really really love the current status quo. I've since stopped reading it because I just can't keep up. I just can't keep up with Big Two comics because Marvel. I love X-Men, I really do, but Marvel putting out 10 books a month and then asking me to read them all and then acting like they don't. Oh well, you can just read the ones that you want, but then putting stuff like for overarching story and all of them,
Right.
it's so much work and I just can't keep up. So I I tend to focus on reading series once they're done, or tend to focus on series that are written by one person. That's why I
Right.
really fell in. The whole reason I fell in love with manga in the first place is because of growing up in the early 2000s. Um, it just it was in a different country, so they just translated it and put it online very easily, so I could read it anywhere. Um, which always made me feel bad because I felt like I was ripping off the artist, which is why I try to buy so many of them that I've enjoyed. Um, but it had such an influence on me because I just had it's so much, and I had the time because I didn't sleep well, so I just would wake up and I'd get up and I'd read a bunch of manga, and
Right.
then uh, so I really fell in love with it, and that's why I'm reading One Piece and Blade of the Immortal. I really love Strange Academy by Scotty Young.
I've heard of it too. I haven't read it.
It's really fun. It's just nice, and it doesn't dabble too much with the Marvel universes, which is really what I want. I tend to like having my own books that are kind of away from everything because it just doing yearly events kills me.
Yeah, I don't really read Big Two anymore, and it's not because I'm above that or for any
No,
particular reason. I buy the Miracle Man series that Gaiman is doing because I find that interesting. It's just that after reading comics for so many years, one is this event thing, but also I've read so many Marvel comics and DC comics over the years. It's like it's hard for me to like say, oh, this is really cool because I look at it, I'm like, okay, this is kind of like a riff on this or this,
it's
and
cyclical.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, are you going to kill this guy? Are you going to bring him back again? Is he going to be this? Is he going to be that? And, it's this whole thing. And so after a while, it's like, and I mean, I did a whole video about like why I stopped reading Big Two and part of like other things, switching to indie comics and manga. But it is hard to keep up and they're not cheap. You're talking $4 or $5 a pop. And if you're not really enjoying them or if you find it exhausting or you're just collecting them and you're not reading them, why go there? And I also like more self-contained stories. Like I'm going to read this chapter and like I'm reading Fist of the North Star. They've been reissuing
oh,
that.
fun.
Okay. That's on paper that I should not like that book. I love that book.
It's a
I mean,
fun book.
it's a yeah. And I buy each one and I read one chunk and I can wait 3 months. I'm good. I read the next chunk. You were saying?
Nothing. I was just agreeing with you. The whole reason I stopped reading like the X-Men is because Hoxpox, I loved it so much because it was doing what you were saying. It was kind of changing the status quo, and it was doing all these fun like twists about the mutants, and it was commenting on comics at that time like listen, we can't kill these characters. That's why they can't die anymore on the island of Krakoa. Listen, they've been beaten up for decades about being because of bigotry, and now they have their own country and they can't do it. But then like over time it just starts bleeding back into the same stuff that it always is. Now it's in a new lens and I like that new lens and I still love these characters, but like if I didn't feel like duped, but it just felt like, oh, we're kind of spinning our wheels in the same mud again, and I don't want to.
Right.
That's not what I want to do.
Right.
That,
Hickman left the book series. He left Marvel early
yeah,
for whatever reasons. And then the problem is like if Hickman is doing the book, it's going to be a good book. But
yes,
if you get somebody else writing the book, even if it's under Hickman's guidance, it's not going to be the same quality as Hickman because Hickman is a really good writer, and not everybody is at that level or can tell that kind of story. Maybe they can tell a good story, but a different way. And I think that's part of it. And two, I think that Marvel now, because they're no longer a comic book company, they're part of a media empire.
yeah,
They're not selling comics. It's like they got to sell comics so the company, they can pay their employees and they can stay in business. They're almost like an idea farm for the animation and the movies. So I think like actually DC, I think, is actually trying to work on making changes to their comics by putting the focus on a lot of the secondary characters like Nightwing and Wally West and all these other characters, people that the fans like to and reach out to a younger group. But with Marvel, it's like, yeah, well, it just seems like that impetus to make really great comics sometimes isn't there. When Hickman left, I was like, oh, well, because I hadn't read Hoxpox yet. I was going to, and then I was like, Hickman left, and I'm like, you know what? I'll wait till they have a collection and find it on sale because I know that it's going to be good for a chunk, and then after that, it's going to be uneven.
Yeah, it's like a lot of those different writers, I liked a lot of them, but it was uneven, and some of the tones just didn't match what I wanted. And I know it was just me, and that's why I kind of had to
Well,
back off.
no, I don't think it's just you. I think I know of quite a few friends that are X-Men fans, and they felt the same, or they stopped collecting it because they're like, it's hard to replace someone who's really good at writing a certain type of story. It's sort of like saying, hey, we had Stanley Kubrick do the movie. We want to do a sequel, but we want you to direct it like Kubrick. Like,
Yeah, it's hard.
you can. I mean, you have that singular voice. It's hard really to like replicate it or do something. Like when Neil Gaiman took over Miracle Man, he didn't try to do what Alan Moore did. He did something different because he had to. He knew that
Yeah.
he had to. He knew that he couldn't do the same thing over again. He probably had no intention of doing the same thing. But a lot of people would feel like, okay, well, Marvel say no, but you gotta write it like Hickman, and it's like, well, dude, that's like saying you gotta play quarterback like Tom Brady. It's like, well, you gotta wrestle like Shawn Michaels. It's like you just can't do
Can't
that.
do that.
You gotta do
That's another reason why I love manga, because it's usually the same author, same artist the whole time. And and
yes,
and I really notice when a writer changes, even when I don't like actively know. Like I one of the main ones I always thought of was I watched The West Wing. And I really loved I watched the whole thing and I really liked The West Wing. And at season 4, suddenly there's a change and I didn't know why. And then I found out later that it's like, oh, because the showrunner left and they had a different showrunner. And I'm like, and that's and it didn't feel right anymore.
right.
So it's very I like I have found that it is safest to follow writers, not characters. That
Yes.
that's why I'm a big fan of following a writer as much as I can. I've read other Hickman stuff because I liked his work so much. Um, I've read everything, not everything. I read a lot of stuff by Brian K. Vaughan.
Mhm.
Um,
He's
uh,
great.
I love Saga, just like everybody else. um, oh, one other thing I'm reading actually now that I think about it is
Hmm.
Elf Quest. I'm enjoying Elf Quest as well
Oh, really?
because Elf Quest I kind of looked into because I felt a kinship with them, like just doing it all out of their backyard. I mean, they were supported by Marvel and Dark Horse and whatnot, but just having this one long overarching fantasy story that it was just kind of them doing their own thing, focusing on
Right.
what they want to do. I guess I find it I'm much more interested in the independent artists that really get to tell the story they're trying to tell. That's why I love Mike Mignola and I love Stan Sakai with Usagi Yimbo,
Right.
and I love all of these manga creators since they're just like you definitely haven't read it, but I read all of Naruto and I like Naruto and it was very important to me when I was growing up. But I will say that they kind of whiffed the ending. But I'm not mad at it because I know I had so many good times with Naruto. I had so many good years with Naruto, and it's the one guy the whole time. It's not like if somebody came in at the very end and ruined the ending and it's a different writer, like then it's like, oh well, now I can blame someone. It's
Right.
very much like he just didn't stick the landing, and it's like, but he stuck to his artistic vision the whole time, and I can respect that, and I'm not mad.
Yeah, I feel like I missed out on so much because I was reading superhero comics up until like 2019. And I started reading comics 1974. And I think, man, I'm catching up now. So I'm catching up on all these independents. And then the pandemic helped because right before they shut everything down in Miami, I was like checking out books at the library. I checked out like 10, 15 graphic, now all different ones.
Sure.
And right before I knew everything was going to close, I got them. And at the next day, the library closed. And so I was just home I was home reading, and I'm trying to do this deep dive, but there's so much manga that I
I
have
know
not read. No, it's
it's
to me, it's
crazy.
like, no, because to me, it's like, I don't want to be morbid, but I only have like, if I'm fortunate, I have 20, maybe 30 years of reading comics left. I want to read it all, man.
I know.
I want to read all the good stuff.
I want to read literally as much as possible.
Same here.
I try my very darndest to have a book on me or multiple books on me at all times. Like I tend to read 2 books at a time. I'm not as good about reading books, but I tend to have like 2 books at a time. I'm almost always reading at least one comic series, or at least like trying to collect the trade paperbacks at a time, if not a
Right.
couple.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoy Weapon X, and if you don't enjoy it, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm
But
sure I'll like it. Barry
but
Windsor Smith. I've read Life Death,
yes, I
and I
have
want
that.
to, and I'm like, Life Death's great. I loved Life Death. I like Wolverine, of course. Everybody does. I don't love him the way that everybody does,
I know
but
what you're
I
saying.
like him too. So I'll have a good time with it. I want to read his new thing. Barry Windsor Smith did something about being a monster.
Monsters. Okay, Monsters is one of my favorite graphic novels of that year. Um, he basically took a pitch that he had for a Hulk, or a Hulk story, I think, that didn't Marvel didn't want. He's been working on it for 30 years, but basically it's about a guy who goes underneath. Like, it's set like in the 60s, but then it flashes back to World War II era, and it's basically about a kid, someone that's like is hired by the military, recruited, and he undergoes experiments, becomes a monster. But it's not your typical superhero thing. And Barry Windsor Smith does everything. It's black and white, but because I always thought, okay, Barry Windsor Smith, I know he can write, I know he can draw, I know he can ink, I know he can color, I know he can letter, but I never thought of him as a cartoonist for some stupid reason. And then when I read this, I'm like, this guy's a badass cartoonist because everything there is his. And that's like his last book. He said after that book, he's retired. He says he just can't draw like that way.
I wouldn't
But
be surprised.
but
It's so intricate.
it's
I
so interesting.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying it's. I love that book. I remember when that book came out, I was telling people this is one of the best books this year. This should have won an Eisner, and it won 3 Eisners. Three different, I think three. And I had some friends tell me, well, it's a popularity contest. I'm like, Barry Windsor Smith has never been a popular guy. It's
He's
like,
popular with those who like him.
yeah,
That's kind of it.
but he's not like, like if Jim Lee comes
Yeah.
out with some comic, oh, that's going to be an Eisner nomination because everybody loves Jim Lee and he sells millions of copies of something. It's like he's never been a guy like the fans, people that love him, like myself, love him, but like he's never been like, you know,
He's not a
like
household
he's
name.
not a household name. You're right. Thank you.
That's it.
And it's like usually it's the household names that get it, but that's a fascinating book. I think it's still in hardcover, but it's a great read. It's just parts of it can be depressing,
Yeah, I
but
like that.
it's to me it's brilliant. That's like that's like when you like have somebody that goes retires, like almost retires, comes out of seclusion, comes out with this last great thing, and then just does a mic drop and says, "I'm done," and just walks away and just like says, "This is how I'm going to go on a high note," and he did. So whenever I see his stuff like out in the wild, I'll buy that too if it's not cheap because it's like it's so good. Um, but yeah, that's a great book. I didn't want to hijack, but yeah, I love that book.
No, hi Jack. I like recommendations. Just because we were talking about artists coming out of the word work, it made me think of the Bill Watterson. Bill Watterson's doing like a new graphic novel that
Yes.
he came out of his pit and said like, look, I've done something, and then went back down there, and I just thought that was
Yeah.
real interesting because it's completely different than anything he's done in the past that I know of.
Yeah, he's one of those guys like a Dan Klaus or a Chris Ware that they're in the laboratory creating something and you never hear anything from them, and all of a sudden, oh, they got a new book.
Yeah, it's
Like,
just fully formed. Here you go.
here you go. Like he's come, like Klaus has that new book Monica, and it's like coming out later this year, and I'm like, what? It's like, okay, here it is, and it's like, oh, I'm buying that. But and these guys like, what? Yeah, that Watson book came out. My manager at the comic shop I buy at told me, he posted on a Facebook page, and I put a comment that said, "Put me down for one of these now." I'm like, I don't know what it is. I'm
Oh
buying
yeah,
it, and it looks so different. You're right. Yeah, right. He came out of this like pit and holding like the sacred stone, and
yeah.
like you're like here. And you're right. It's fascinating that these guys can just do this. Like
I think
Chris,
left to
where
my druthers, that's the kind of man I'd want to be. The one who just toils away and then comes out with something.
yeah, Adrian Tomina is like that. Also, like these guys, they'll do a New York cover. They'll do a cover here. They'll do a New York cover here, and then, oh yeah, I got a book coming out. It's coming out in 4 months.
Yeah, I mean, like I just made a 400-page manifesto. It's beautiful. Here you go. I made it. I don't know.
I've been working on this too for 5, 6 years. You know, ain't no big deal.
Yeah, I hope you remember me still. I've just disappeared. I'm off the map. But
Yeah,
here you go.
and now I'm gonna go back into the cave.
Yeah, and thank you for my Eisners. I'll go back into my cave.
But yeah, it's amazing. These guys just come out of like, I don't know if you saw Mad Max Fury Road.
I did. Yeah.
Okay, he comes out of like 20 something years, 30 years of making movies, and makes a sequel that's arguably, I mean, I saw the original Mad Max in theaters, and I was like, okay, this sequel's better.
Yeah.
And it's the same guy. He's kind of like, you thought I was dead, but I'm alive and kicking. And he came out with saying, hey, look at this. This is what I did. And there's very little CGI in this damn thing. Yeah, I did it old
Yeah.
school. I did it old school. Try to top that, punks. And then
It's
just goes,
crazy.
and he just goes back in his cave where he's like, who knows what secrets he's going to tell us next time. Yeah, I just find, yeah, I find that whole, when guys do that, just to be able to do that and be successful at it.
Yeah. That's really the key. It's like if I could do that, I definitely would. I definitely would love to be a man in a cave drawing a picture, and then I just put out my picture when it's ready and done and perfect. Um, but I have to put it out more often because that's the only way to get like people to see it.
Yeah, well, you're earlier in your career. I mean, Klaus has been making comics since the '80s, where too, and you know, you that's
I can
that.
aspire to be an old man creating comics in a cave.
Oh, dude, that's the dream.
That's the dream.
Because I mean, at that point, you're like, oh, Fantagraphics still published this. Like, you don't even have to worry about, oh, you
Yeah.
know, I gotta pitch this book to a bunch of publishers, and I hope I don't get screwed on the deal, and this and that. You're like, yeah, no. It's like that famous Pablo Picasso story that he was at a restaurant.
Oh, the napkin
The
thing.
napkin, the thing where the
Wandering
receipt, the guy
around.
gave him the receipt, and he drew like a little doodle and signed it. And
Mhm.
he goes, give this to the maitre d' and see if he'll accept this as payment. And they did. It was like, what are you gonna do? Tell that guy no? He has an original Picasso doodle. You know, like, I would take it. You know,
Yeah.
to have that like mojo to do that. That just to me is great. But anyway, listen, I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about. We've talked quite a long time, so I apologize
Yeah.
for taking so much of your time. But I do want to say, I want to thank you. But more importantly, I'm going to put it in the description a link to your Kickstarter,
Thank you.
you know, which I have backed.
Thank you again.
Even though I have issue 3, I have backed issue 3 because I can give it to someone I know. And that original art for the add-ons is tempting me. It's like I keep thinking about it and thinking about it because it's like, well, we're going on summer vacation and this and that, but man, that would look really cool on my wall. And just saying,
You have free reign. They're all available.
I know, I know. But there's a lot of great add-ons with that, and just for anybody watching this, I think it's a great way to get into 3 big chunky issues of a great story. Like I said, when I saw the covers, it just grabbed me. I don't know what it was really, because it was just something like, I think it's like music, like back in the day when you had to buy a lot of albums, the cover art was really cool and like really critical. And like, if the album cover was cool, you're probably thinking, well, then there's probably something cool inside if they put this much work into the cover. And doing good covers is like a lost, it's like not a dying art, it's an art that a lot of people don't have. So I remember seeing those covers and I'm like, oh, that looks cool. And then I saw some of your interiors in the webtoon and I was like, I gotta get this. And you know, so it's a really great comic. I really enjoy it. I love Norse mythology. It's a whole different take on what you're used to seeing in comics. So, you know, I'm glad you're fully funded. Hope you get a lot more. And yeah, you're just doing the grind. You're doing the things that you need
Yeah.
to do to get noticed. Because that whole deal about if you build a better mousetrap, people beat a path to your door is BS. You have to market. You have
Yeah,
to, you have to, you have to, and that's hard for creatives to do because,
it's the worst.
well, people, it's hard to sell yourself. You have to have like that ego, and you're creative, so most creatives care about the art and everything. It's hard to like do that, and I think it's hard for most people to do. That's why most people don't go into sales, because it's almost like a skill that you're born with to be able to sell stuff. Um, so um, I think that it's a great book. I just want to say I think it's really excellent. I hope more people take advantage of the Kickstarter. I think it's a great, inexpensive way to get some really great comics. I mean, you could spend $5 on a crappy big two comic, or you could spend not much money on a great self-published comic by somebody that really cares and is actually doing something really cool. And that's not for the benefit of the interview. That's how I really feel. Like, you'll find out that if I support a comic, it's because I really dig it. Um, and
Well, I
so,
appreciate it.
yeah, it's really good. So I want to thank you very much. And on Instagram, where are you at on Instagram?
Okay. On Instagram, I am Joshua Millistrator. It's just Illustrator with an M because of my
Right.
last name.
Hmm.
My website's Fymbulwynter.com. It's spelled with a couple Y's. But if you go to Kickstarter and you type in FYM, it probably will be the only thing that comes up.
Yes.
Um,
And then you're on
yeah,
Facebook page, I think.
yeah. Joshua Miller Illustration on Facebook as well. Um,
And
Webtoons, Tapas, Fymbulwynter's there too. My website.
and you have a TikTok, which I've liked your videos. And it's I don't really go into TikTok too much because I don't know. I just like a lot of the content doesn't speak to me, but I actually looked at your TikTok and it's actually like, okay, this is the way you should do comics on TikTok.
I try my best with TikTok. I'm not a fan, but I know I will be cold blooded about this. It is a useful marketing tool. Some people love it. Some people really enjoy using it. Me, I do it when I have something that I'd like to show off. I do actively have to make like an ad for my Kickstarter on there just to show off the book because
Yeah,
that's just the way to do it.
well, no, but you actually do it right, because I've seen a lot of people do comics on TikTok, and it's like, yeah, I'm like, maybe I'm just not the right demographic, but yours are just, they're ad catchy, they're image, they're not long, they're edited quick, like to fit TikTok. I mean, I'm not a TikTok expert, but I thought, okay, this is a way of doing it where it's quick and it's entertaining and it's not boring, but it conveys like this is interesting.
There's just a style of TikTok video that I like that I try to emulate where it's just like the inking process. It's just watching a piece of paper get colored and it's nice and relaxing, and that's all I kind of try for. I don't know. I feel like I'm okay at it. Some people are very good. Yeah,
Yeah, but I think it's how much time, and some of those people I think either have the innate skill or they get help with it, or you know, it all depends. But I think you do a good job. But anyway,
thank you.
I'm going to put all the links to all your social media as well in the description.
Sure.
Um, but I want to thank you again for your time and for a a lot of your time. And congratulations on your Kickstarter. Good luck. I hope you get a lot more funding, and I hope that people start taking more notice of your work. It's good work. Um, and we need more good work, because there's a lot of comics out there, and this is like a golden age, but there's still a lot of bad comics out there. So, like for me,
Yeah.
so it's like I'm not going to talk about who or what, but
No.
I'm just going to say it's good to see young cartoonists creating really cool work, self-publishing. I that to me is like the future. That's what I like, and I'm like, um, I like seeing now. I like seeing that a lot. It's like, okay, another young guy who's like creating some really cool stuff. Let me start reading some of this stuff. But anyway, but thank you again for your time, and you have a pleasant rest of your day.
You too. Thank you. Thank you for your time.